What's poppin'? VenomousStare coming at you with another Zerg video. This time we're going to be talking about Mutastyles versus Protoss. On this fancy new map, you will note that your natural expansion is right by the base of your main ramp. This can cause some peculiar situations versus Protoss where you can find yourself getting cannon rushed in a plethora of different ways. I mean, Protoss really has a lot of tools at their disposal here. You note that the creep does not extend down to the ramp. It does not extend above the mineral line of the natural. So you have to be very cautious with hatch first play. I saw a relatively early scout with my initial overlord. So I retroactively decide, okay, even though I have a hatchery going out to make an expansion, forget it. It's not worth it. Because best case scenario for me, the guy just sits here and blocks me around all day, and he's gone Nexus first at home, and he just gets ahead that way. Worst case scenario, I sit here, he screws me around forever, he lets me make the hatch, makes a couple cannons, and on this map, since you can build a lot of the cannons, let's just say, in range of the main ramp, in a very easy way, due to being able to create little walls with these pylons in the gas, it makes it very difficult for Zerg. So I countered that by opening Speedling Expand. Now the economy for this build is a little bit worse, but it's worth it because if your opponent tries to cannon rush you, basically you can go right into Ravagers and you're going to have a queen out earlier. You also will have the ability to get Zergling speed quicker, obviously, because in StarCraft in the early game, I know this is a very simple concept for some people. As you see, a couple lings that I made early, I just like to aggressively shift-click randomly A moves throughout the map to look for proxies, and what do you know? I found his probe. So this is extraordinarily common. If ever someone sends out a worker that early, like we saw, and then it disappears, and it's Protoss. This isn't really true with Terran. A lot of times Terrans just retreat their workers, but with Protoss, they're trying to hide that sucker out on the map. Now Protoss players have gotten a little bit lazy when it comes to proxy pylons ever since they've lost their precious 4-second auto ridiculous warp-in nonsense. But it's still very good to hide pylons out on the map just so you have backup options. Also, of course, normal proxies, hiding tech, stuff like that is still viable. And this isn't something that takes a lot of APM. I am simply just selecting one Zergling, holding shift and clicking my minimap a lot. 4 Zealot move out here for Loon. So we actually need to rewind a little bit, because we need to talk about scouting. So after I've gone Speedling Expand, basically the build is, okay, I see the probe moving in, screw it, I'm just going to gas pool, and then spend my first 100 gas on Speedling. And of course you want to get your queen. I like to elect to get a second one, that way either you can inject as soon as this finishes, maybe you can lay a tumor down if you want. Queens are also very good defensively, they're very flexible. So this is what I wanted to talk about. Double gateway openings. These are becoming significantly more popular. For a very long time it was Forge and Nexus first, and then it really turned into one gate into fast tech. We saw extraordinarily greedy builds where people would tech like right into Archon drop off of one gate and then really only have the 3 other gates finish when the Warp Prism was all the way out. So I'm going to pause it here. So whenever people open double gate, first of all, it's almost always at the front door, and that is extraordinarily important because that means you're almost always going to be able to scout it with your initial overlord. Now double gate indicates early aggression. Usually what it means is the Protoss player is going to make 2 units at once, and then once the units are finished they're going to push you, or they're going to make the 2 units and then make 2 more units and then push you. Normally this is 2 Zealots or 2 Adepts. Now there's a very easy way to tell what they're going to do. If they're going to do Adepts, they will very often leave both the gates idle, and as soon as that Cybercore finishes, boom, both of the gates will start production. And if you look closely at the gateways, they actually look a little bit different whenever they're producing things. Again, I like to point these things out for the new player. Some of the old guys, some of the old veterans might be saying, oh, well, I already, I knew that, but I like to break it down for the rookie every now and again. So double gateway openers, early aggression with units, and it's always going to come in increments of 2, and it's almost always going to be zealots or adepts. So let's talk about how to defend that. Now remember earlier when I said making an extra queen was good? That's because queens early are one of the best tools that Zerg has defensively. They're good against air, Phoenix, Oracle. They're good against adepts. They're good against zealots. They're decent against stalkers. And quite frankly, it's the only thing that Zerg has that is range. On this map, it is extraordinarily important to connect your main to your natural with creep. Especially if your opponent is going for a rush play. If this is against Terran, think Fast Hellions or Bunker Rush. Protoss, stuff like this, double gateway openers, potentially Cannon Rush. So I think what I should have done is after my first queen injected and I made another one, I should have made a tumor here, walked it down, and then I would have been able to have bases connected with creep. Why does this little amount of creep matter, you might be asking? Because for pushes like this, or for Stargate pushes or something to that effect, the difference between the queen walking a completely creeped path and a queen walking a path with a significant amount of uncreeped surface is night and day difference. The queen movement speed is the way it is because back in 2010, ZvZ got really weird because people were making a lot of queens and just pushing across the map with roaches. I mean, it was freaking blistering sands and stuff, but Blizzard said, okay, we have to nerf the queen off of creep. And still to this day, obviously, the queen kind of sucks off of creep. So you can see me trying to lay a tumor down here on the low ground. This is suboptimal, but since the zealots are at my front door, I have to do something quickly. And I just want something to be started. With creep spread, it's always a matter of getting it down as soon as possible. I have noted that there is another gateway, and I'm going to play the clip. So how do you defend this? Because if you miss micro and Protoss gets a lead, and what I mean by a lead is if they kill your initial Zerglings, it sort of snowballs out of control. If you play League of Legends, think about it like this. Imagine feeding 4 kills to a Riven very early on. It's going to snowball out of control and become a huge pain in the ass, and it's going to become an untenable situation. Now StarCraft is like this in a very similar way in the sense that with Zerg, whenever you're being attacked and pressed, if you lose units early on to the pressure due to bad micro, you're never ever going to be able to hold the push because they're so close to your base that you actually need 100% of those units that you would have made total by the time you're ready to engage. If you have 80% of the stuff that you should have had, some pushes will just kill you, or deal severe damage that will make it almost impossible to come back in the game. Fuck off. That's really irritating. I don't need to be connected to BattleNet. Watch a replay. So here's how you micro this. You have the queens together and you have the lings together. Ideally you have them both on 2 different hotkeys. Definitely have one of the sets of units on a hotkey. So here's what you want to do. Since we're making a lot of lings, after seeing, okay, he's producing stuff, or yeah, you see he's producing out of this gate, and he's definitely, there's a risk that he could be aggressive, and we don't want to lose to this. It's always better to err on the side of, I'll make a few extra lings and then just get map control, than it is to just die making too many drones. So lings on the way, and the way that you micro against this is you fight the zealots a little bit. You don't want to take losses. You want to fight while he runs away, and then when he turns to fight, run away with the lings and get pot shots off with the queens. Have him press all the way up onto creep, the deeper the better, and you just want to stall. You don't want to trade off lings unless you're killing zealots, you don't want to trade off links for shields is what I meant to say. And you always want your queens to be really dealing out a lot of damage. So let's see what happens here. Step up with the queens and make sure that you finish zealots. So there I traded a zealot for some links. That's good. And here, he micros decently well, but I pick off the other zealot, move up with the queens, and clear the push. So that was just some light little 2-gate pressure that he was doing. He wasn't really expecting to kill me with that. And then after your opponent does something like that, you don't want to make a big round of lings and try to kill them. What you actually want to do is make drones and get more ahead in the economy game and really start spreading creep and get focused on scouting and upgrades and tech. Versus Protoss, I like to spend my second 100 gas on Overlord speed. Now, I know earlier I said spend your first 100 gas on Zergling speed, and it might have gone over some people's heads, but since you only mine with one geyser, the amount of gas that you get is actually very small, so you have to map out what you want to spend the initial little burst of it on. Overlord speed is great. You can just fly through Protoss's base and see exactly what they're doing. Note that I've made a hefty drone count here, a beautiful 16. That's exactly what you want. Same in the main, and the 3 mining the gas. Took a third baser on 430. And let's just note what I did with the lings. I didn't just run them all in the front door and let them die trying to, oh, I'm going to try to snipe the cyber. No, I left a few of them at the third. Now, ideally, maybe a few at the third, maybe one out here and one out here. But I have an Overlord out here to check for this third, so it's not the end of the world. So this is what you want to do whenever you get Overlord speed, is you want to simply use the move command, hold down shift, and click throughout their base, and then move your Overlord to safety. This allows you to see exactly what your opponent's doing. Now I see that Loon here is trying to take a third. I also see that he's gone Robo Facility behind a few gates. This is just a standard macro play. A lot of the time it's very common to make a few observers, see what Zerg is doing, get detection, mix in some Immortals. Of course, Immortals are very strong against a lot of what Zerg makes on the ground. However, Robo Openers are weak against Spires, and you see that this Spire has just started for me. This is a Reactionary Spire. Now, I don't like to blindly go Spire and try to tech into Mutalisks. I like to make what's called Reactionary Spires. So why this is because in this matchup, Protoss versus Zerg, it's very, very common for the Protoss player to make a Stargate. Phoenix counter Mutas. And quite frankly, the Stargate's great for scouting, so if they make an Oracle and keep it alive, it's very hard for them to be surprised by Mutas, quite frankly. And if they just have a handful of Phoenix built up, they already have the Stargate tech in place to make more Phoenix, maybe even add a second Stargate. It's really bad, because a lot of the time with Mutas, it's the surprise factor. You really want to catch someone off guard, nail them with your initial harass, and whenever they have Phoenix, it's like, oh, I'm going to move my Phoenix over here and defend this harass. And then you do this retarded thing where you run your Mutas away and they fire away at you at like the same speed your Mutas move. It's terrible. So Mutas are definitely a reactionary thing in this matchup. And what triggers me to build the Spire? It's the robotics facility. I know a lot of new players are probably wondering, well, you said it's reactionary. What do you look for? Because whenever I talk to my friends who have just started playing the game, a lot of times I'll hear this phrase, well, you say tell me to scout, but whenever I look at their base, I click on the buildings, but I don't know what they do. And you see what they do over here on the right, and I'm not going to pedantically go through each one of the units, but if you see Robo, that's usually indicative of I'm not going Stargate. Sometimes you'll see Robo mixed with Twilight because of Adept openers. Sometimes you'll see Robo mixed with Dark Shrine for DT drop / Archons. But it's a little bit rare to see the Stargate Robo combo. Especially trying to take a third too. You just don't really have that much money. We can see here Loon has a lot of his forces out at his natural. Some out here at his third. Protoss players, it's always best to dump down a couple early shield batteries to try to hold your third. Double upgrades here. So Loon is trying to macro. But let's focus on the Zerg here, because despite the fact that the toss has gone robo, we need to focus on the Zerg and see what you need to be doing. Alright, so let's just note a few things. Whenever you go Spire, the mineral saturation is not as important. What is important is getting these geysers pumping. You want to have as many geysers as possible. Now in this situation, when I say as many geysers as possible, I mean you're going to have 4. You have to have at least 4 to support mutas. And ideally you get your third kicking and you get the gas geysers mining before the Spire even finishes. So another thing to note is my creep spread. It's decent, considering that we've really only had one queen out here working, spreading the creep. And note that the creep has been spread pretty damn evenly, but if you're a newbie and you're thinking, well, I don't have that much APM, where should I just really focus on my creep? Like I said, you want to have some connecting the main, and notice that this did kind of a half-assed job of connecting the main, but it did it. So you want to have main to natural, you want to have natural to third. That one's insanely important. Natural to third, that one's the most important. And then it's important, I would say, to in general have creep spread going towards your opponent so you know when they're going to move out. And if you put a gun to my head and said, well, which position, I would say towards their third or just towards the front of their natural. But ideally, you want to have creep going everywhere. And this is pretty decent for one queen. The trick with creep, getting the active tumors down, and always remember to spread them at the maximum length. Another thing that's important with Muta and Ling styles is you want to aim to make a macro hatch, because they're very larva intensive. So I know I paused it a lot, but this is potentially going to be the most important thing that I've said in this entire video. So earlier, remember when I said you have to have the gas geysers alive and kicking? That is because as soon as the Spire finishes, a few things need to happen. You need to be looking in the top right up at your supply, and you need to be damn sure that you have about at least 20 open supply, probably even more. It is the absolute worst for the Spire to finish, and you make 2 mutas, and here spawn more overlords, because that means your power spike has gone completely flaccid because you're a bad player. So you have to have a lot of extra supply because it's a big supply spike, and if you don't have a lot of open supply, you will be focused on microing the mutas. You will get supply blocked, especially whenever the Spire finishes, and boom, you want to make a lot. The second most important thing is saving money. Now this is counterintuitive to what you would normally think about in StarCraft, which is you will always want to keep your money low and actively spend it. But in the 2 minutes that lead up to, okay, I've identified Robo and I want to tech into Spire, you start to play in this very peculiar way where you squeeze out a bunch of drones, try to take a third, and then get the geysers going as soon as possible, get the Spire down, and then whenever the Spire starts, essentially you want to go into hibernation. Think Cell from Dragon Ball Z, where essentially you bank up minerals and gas, because as soon as the Spire finishes, like I said, you want to have a huge supply gap, so boom, you can make 10 mutas, 7 mutas, 8 mutas, around that number. You're rarely going to have enough money to make like in the teens, but from about 7 to 11 is that money number. And of course you want to try to get an upgrade +1 right when the Spire finishes. But like I said earlier, when you're in what I call the cell period, this sort of gestative, very fragile time where you don't want to be making any attacking units. Really, and this is like the odd part. Remember earlier when I said, well, normally in StarCraft, you want to keep your money low, always be making drones, always be expanding and getting further ahead. Well, when you go into this lull hibernation phase, what you're really kind of saying is, As long as I have 6 geysers going, I want to spend the little bit of mineral float I have on drones, but I don't ever want to spend too many minerals to where when the spire finishes I have more gas than minerals. When the spire finishes, you're probably going to want to have like 800 minerals, 800 gas, or something to that effect. So it's this peculiar tight wire act where you want to churn out as many drones as possible, but then again, between having enough larvae and having enough minerals, you really can't. When I say churn out as many drones as possible, and we can see that Loon sees the mutas coming in, and he's in this awful spot where he doesn't have pylons to put cannons in his main, or in his mineral line. He does in his main, but I meant to say mineral line initially. So he's going to try to defend with stalkers, but with no Stargate here, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to defend. Because think about this, if you're Protoss, you're sort of stuck in your base, you're limited by your own Sim City. And look at Loon, he's saying, okay, I'm going to get my cannons up, because I'm going to lose my workers if I don't. I'm going to get my cannons up. So you got to have cannons. Cannons in each base. They're really important. Oh, shit, I lost all my sentries. See, this is why mutas are good. Because we're not perfect. And it might be very easy for the average Redditor or the average YouTube commentator to say, well, these players are just dog shit, and the reason that they're making mistakes is because they're just bad, and good players would never make this mistake. That's just not the case. I mean, you see top-tier pro gamers do absolutely goofy shit all the time. So, for the average Joe, the person who's watching this video, I just want to point out, this is why I think mutas are good. And remember earlier when I said the initial part of mutas was the power spike right when the spire finished, so I successfully didn't get supply blocked, didn't over drone, and most importantly and thankfully didn't get attacked. Now granted, I knew he was going robo and I knew he was taking a third, so I probably wasn't going to get attacked because look, he has to wheel all the way down here to defend a third, and whenever a third is hard to defend, obviously Protoss has to respect Ling run-bys and stuff more. So here with mutas, remember, he just saw them with his obs, like probably 20 seconds ago. So he's in this wonky position where he's saying, okay, Stalker's at my natural, I won't take damage there. He probably won't fly straight to my main, but if he does, I'm going to try to get a cannon up at each base. But this is the problem, there's so many things going on at once. It's like a tight wire act, it's like juggling. If you screw up and slip, it's going to be bad. And right here at his front door, he had his sentries and he had his immortals. And when he looked to make his cannons, I picked off the sentries. Now this is why mutas are great. They put you in the driver's seat to do damage. They put you in the driver's seat in the sense that you can dictate the flow of the game. So often with Zerg, it feels like you are on the back foot. And notice that I have so much creep spread all throughout the map, and this again helps you not be put on the back foot. Despite the fact that Zerg is a very strong macro race, Zerg also has a lot of tools at their disposal to keep their opponent guessing and keep their opponent scared, and oftentimes as Zerg players we're too afraid to utilize these options. Now I'm not saying go muta every game. Remember, I spent a large portion of this video talking about the Reactionary Spire and the fact that I saw Robo, so that means, you know, Observer and Immortal, maybe he'll even go into Colossus or something. And it also of course meant that we're not going to see a flock of Phoenix, and if he goes for Archon drop or something like that, then you can shut down Warp Prism play with mutas anyway. So mutas were a solid choice here, and of course are strongest right when they pop off. So my opponent here has lost a few sentries, and here you have to use your SimCity, or excuse me, you have to use your opponent's SimCity against him. Right now my opponent is disjointedly trying to join his army together, so I have to not lose mutas for free, and I have to use my mineral float to make lings so I can have a small ling force to pressure my opponent. Now muta styles aren't like muta styles are versus Terran. Versus Terran, what you see is a large Ling and Baneling force that's sort of the meat of the army that punches through the bio, and then the mutas sort of can harass, they can pick off medevacs, and they can really defend, and they're more of the utility role because they're like I said, they're doing the harassment and they're defending the harassment. With this style, it's not like that. The mutas are the crux of the issue. They are the point of the style. They're the stars. They are really the focus of the build. So that means that it's very mutacentric in my play. Notice that, like I said, 6 gas guys are up, and the creep spread here helped us be defensive. Remember, if we didn't have creep spread like this, there's a bigger chance we could have get caught off guard, and that would have meant that, oh, that little lull period, the sell period, what do you know? We actually needed units then, and it meant that, well, we just would have died. And obviously with Zerg, that's sort of your biggest fear, is you overdrone and die. So remember, great creep spread goes hand in hand with defending. If you don't creep spread well, it's a lot easier to die. And believe me, I've played a ton of ladder games where I sit here and do nothing but creep spread and then get steamrolled anyway because I wasn't scouting enough, I wasn't really harassing, I get too caught up on creep spread. But it's very important, and vision is very important in this game and in RTS in general. So here's what I want to do with my mutas, and here's how I want to micro them. I want to always be putting them in a position where my opponent has to walk all the way in some pain in the ass, lollygag direction, preferably through his own buildings. And then I want to go to the other spot that's all the way around without taking damage. Mutas are expensive. They're 100. Do not trade them. Don't fight stalkers for mutas. Do damage with mutas, run away. Do damage with mutas, run away. If you're a good player, spread creep, hit injects, and make drones or lings while you're doing it. And you all want to be good players, and I'm no god, and I can manage to do a little bit of production while I'm harassing with mutas. But the reason I said that is you don't want to get over-focused on micro and mutas, and you look back and, you know, you have 40 drones, no drones here at your third, you haven't taken any bases at the 15-minute mark. You don't want to get hard stuck on mutas as far as microing them and devoting your attention to them goes. Remember, all you have to do is hit 4, or your hatchery hotkey, to pump out some units rather quickly. Very important for new players, and I know a lot of you veterans are like, yeah, that's just second nature to me at this point. So this is very important. Look at Loon's vision. Right now, he's in a position where the Nexus is low and he has to defend, and he is. He's wheeling out with his army. But like I said, the third base is pretty damn far out. This is another reason why mutas are great. Maps like this where the third can be attacked and then you can immediately fly into the main, whether it be with mutas or medevacs. They're very, very annoying to defend that kind of play against. So Loon is going to come out here, and theoretically he would be able to clean up some mutas if there were no lings. Now let's just look at his vision. There could be a whole torrent and flood of lings coming down to just slam into him. So what does he do? He backs up a little bit and he starts to fight the lings, but the third does go down.
Our pylon is under attack.
So immediately into the main, and boom, you want to snipe off things that are annoying. And what do I mean by that? I mean that pylon right there is low health, and you also want to run lings in your opponent's base. Don't get addicted to this if you're a new player, because you can really steal some wins and do severe damage by running a few lings in their base. But really what I was aiming to do was run the lings in at the same time you harass with mutas. Always aim to go for probes if you can and then run away, and Loon just taps out. So at its core, this is a harassment-based strategy, and I'm getting attack upgrades for each of my units. And this is pretty damn cutthroat. I'm not on a huge economy, and I'm not upgrading properly, really. That's more slop than actual style, though, to be honest. But let's just... I know this video's been long, but if you're still around, I'll talk about how I micro the mutas. So notice I went right in and sniped the cannon. And here, basically, I'm in a position where I know he doesn't have blink because I didn't scout Twilight, because remember, Overlord speed, I was scouting him. So I'm just focus firing here. I know that he will have to come all the way down with his slow ass stalkers and defend this. And you know, if he had moved his army, I know the average commenter is going to be saying, well, he's bad and he's slow because he didn't move his army down 20 seconds sooner. Well, obviously, commenter, what you don't realize is what Loon did realize. If he does that, moving the mutas right into the main, boom. Easy peasy. Remember, this Twilight just recently finished. So it's a choice. And with this many mutas, it's difficult to deal with. This isn't your average 8 muta, like, okay, like I can deal with that with a handful of stalkers. Even with upgrades, it's very difficult to deal with this amount of mutas. 17 mutas. So between the unusually high muta count and the Ling swing, he loses the third, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. You always want to go for things that you know you can pick off with mutas. Don't get in a position where you're like trying to kill whole barracks and gateways and stuff, and like, since the building has 1500 HP, he runs his army up and kills some of your mutas while you're doing it. Do stuff like what I did. Kill a pylon, run away. It's annoying because notice it powered down his Twilight. He has no hope of getting blink. And since he doesn't have a Stargate, my god, he needs blink. So what you should aim to do with muta styles like this is, oftentimes Protoss players will just say, oh, control army hotkey, or because they're having to run back and forth to the third and main, they say, okay, I'm just going to move everything back and forth on one hotkey, or they just get sloppy and leave a hole in the wall. So whenever you're harassing them a lot, it's always a dirty move to run in with Lings and try to kill their workers whenever you're attacking their workers at another location. Granted, he has a cannon-each mineral line, but we see here, okay, he's defending the attack there, and what do you know? The muta's coming to his main. And really the moment that pisses him off, I think, and makes him leave, is he sees that right whenever he loses a crap load of workers, he's getting attacked again at his front door. And of course, if he had run up, you just run east and then north all the way up. So some things to note. Notice I was dropping creep on this base. I can deduce he doesn't have this one because I was just freaking there. Dropping creep on this base. These should have been spread out dropping creep. Mass spread. Creep with queens. Banelings with bane speed. You should be going 1-1 and then probably into hive. Thing about mutas is if they're in a situation like this where you're really far ahead because you caught them off guard, you can just close the game out by making more mutas and then Ling Bane with upgrades, tech into hive, maybe even ultras if you had to. But if you're going for this style and you don't really catch them off guard, or you screw up and lose your mutas, maybe go into Hydra or something more robust. Anyway, rate, comment, sub. I know it was a long one, but I really wanted to get into it since I haven't done a vid like this in a long time.